All right, good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and call this special city council meeting to order. First public hearing on the millage and budget, Monday, September 18th, 2023 at 6 p.m. We will all stand for a moment of silence, and then we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, thank you. Pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. Madam Clerk, roll call.
Mayor Jones?
Here.
Vice Mayor Nunn?
Here.
Councilmember Dixon?
Here.
Councilmember Dodd?
Here.
And Councilmember McPartlin?
Here.
Thank you.
All right, City Attorney.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is the first of two millage and budget hearings. Tonight we're dealing with tentative millage and tentative budget during the next budget hearing tentatively set for September 27th, 2023, subject to City Council approval. You will be considering the final millage rate and final budget. This hearing is pursuant to Florida Statute 200.065, Method of Fixing Millage, Section 2C, which reads in part, prior to the conclusion of the hearing, the governing body of the taxing authority shall amend the tentative budget as it sees fit, adopt the amended tentative budget, recompute its proposed millage rate, and publicly announce the percent, if any, by which the recomputed proposed millage rate exceeds the rollback rate computed pursuant to subsection 1. That percent shall be characterized as the percentage increase in property taxes tentatively adopted by the governing body. Subsection 2D reads in part, within 15 days after the meeting adopting the tentative budget, the taxing authority shall advertise its intent to finally adopt a millage rate and budget along with the final hearing date. In no event may the millage rate adopted pursuant to this paragraph exceed the millage rate tentatively adopted pursuant to paragraph C. Subsection 2E1 indicates that in these hearings, this first substantive issue discussed shall be the percentage increase in millage over the rollback rate necessary to fund the budget, if any, and the specific purposes for which ad valorem tax revenues are being increased. During such discussion, the governing body shall hear comments regarding the proposed increase and explain the reasons for the proposed increase over the rollback rate. The general public shall be allowed to speak and to ask questions prior to the adoption of any measures by the governing body. The governing body shall adopt its tentative or final millage rate prior to adopting its tentative or final budget. So while I'm reading them together, the law requires that you must consider the millage rate first before the budget. So tonight you will be considering resolutions number R-2322 and R-2323. At this point, I'm prepared to read the two resolutions. Resolution R-2322, a resolution of City of Sebastian, Indian River County, Florida, adopting a tentative millage of 3.1955 mils for the calendar year 2023, providing for conflict, providing for scrivener's errors, and providing for an effective date. Resolution 2323, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Sebastian, Indian River County, Florida, adopting the tentative budget for the fiscal year beginning on October 1st, 2023, and ending on September 30th, 2024, making appropriations for the payment of operating expenses, capital expenses, and for principal and interest payments on indebtedness of the city in the city's general fund, special revenue funds, capital improvement funds, golf course fund, airport fund, and building fund, as provided for in Schedule A, attached to here, establishing authority of the city manager to implement the budget, providing for conflict, scrivener's errors, and providing for an effective date. At this point, I'm turning it over to the city manager.
Mr. Benton.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, good evening. But tonight, we have tentative millage of 3.1955 is recommended. This was the tentative millage that was set for the trim notice at the July 26th meeting of the City Council. This millage is in accordance, the millage of 3.1955 in accordance with state statutes is advertised as a 21.62% higher than the computed rollback millage. I do want to point out that it is 10% higher than the existing millage that we currently have. But per state statutes, we have to show the 21.62% compared to the rollback rate. These revenues will be applied to the general fund expenditures projected in fiscal year 23 and 24. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Ken Kilgore for a presentation on our millage and budget. Thank you.
Good evening. So getting right into it. Is not everybody up on the public? Okay. For the general fund budget, we're going to speak about that group of accounts first. The personnel cost increased $1.7 million, operating expense from $322,000, direct capital spending and transfers for projects, which is really talking about most of the same thing as our project activity, is the balance to have a total increase of the budget of $1,961,056, which is a 12.59% increase over the amended budget for the year that would end now. The explanation for why personnel cost went up to $1.7 million is basically because the health insurance increased by 10%. We not only gave the Schedule 5% increases for employee pay rates, but we made additional adjustments. And we've added 5 full-time positions, changed 2 part-time positions to full-time, and we allocated funds for what we're calling the Organizational Efficiency Program. And I believe the city manager wanted to speak briefly on that.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Kilgore. So just a little bit of information. I know I've gotten a few questions in regards to the organizational efficiency allocation. And so basically what is included in this and what we're looking at doing is we are going to evaluate the entire structure of the organization and see what we can do to become more efficient in our process and our time management within our program for projects. I know one of the things that's been identified is, speeding up projects, becoming a little bit more accountable with our projects and how we're moving forward with that. So those are things that I'm beginning to assess now. Also within this, and we can consider a little bit of efficiency, but is our presence in communication and social media. So marketing and communication is one item that we're going to be looking heavily at in regards to a possible new position within that, so that we can get information out to the public and improve our communication to the public. So that's kind of thoughts on how we're going to go forward with that allocated money. Really don't have formal plans yet, but we are currently evaluating it and going to go forward with a plan after the first of the year if it gets approved in the budget.
All right, thank you.
I wanted to detail for you what the positions added in the general fund would be. You can see that's the 5 full-time additions as well as the 2 part-timers, 2 full-time. So looking only at the operating accounts, this does not consider personnel accounts or capital accounts or transfers. But when we first drafted the budget, we had increased those accounts by $318,803. That included some new additional costs that we had this year for the election, the special events that could not be funded from the CRA any longer, the insurance premium increases, and there was a $46,000 of changes to other accounts. Those are other operating accounts. Since we first posted the draft budget to the website, we have changed by, we had $75,000 budgeted for the coming year for the strategic plan. We moved that back and funded that in 2023. We've added back the dock insurance premiums because my intentions to make that a self-insurance fund just are not practical. So they did go down on their premium this year, which I thank them for doing, but still be looking at that over the years. But I don't think there's another solution other than have an actual insurance policy on the docks. We've added $10,000 for sustainable Sebastian activities, and there's another $13,725 with just a few other minor changes to accounts.
Ken, before we move on from this page, on the additional election costs, did we not already budget for the election coming up during the year? That's increased cost from the supervisor of elections.
Yes, that's about the $40,000 that we're adding. We had previously added to the first draft of this budget.
Right.
So it is contained then in our budget numbers currently.
So there was no additional cost. There's nothing else added to that cost is what I'm saying. The projections from last year, we know this election is coming up, and next year we have the same thing is my concern, is why I'm asking that question.
Well, maybe Jeanette can explain it better, but I think she provided for that additional cost in her estimates that she gave to us to include.
Yes, so this year's going to be $3 per voter because we're in a standalone election. But then the next year, when we stand with the county and the state election, it'll be less money.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense then. Thank you.
So of the, when I say direct capital expenditures, those are the ones that are actually accounted for directly out of general fund. We do transfer some of our capital projects and other long-term projects out from the general fund to a capital improvement fund, just so we can keep track of those projects until they are completed. So since the original draft budget, we have added, we've actually moved the senior center roofing funding that we had for that project. We've moved it into the current year. So that actually reduces the amount needed to be funded for next year. We adjusted some equipment pricing that we had in the numbers for the Public Works Road Department. That cost came in, or they adjusted their estimates on what that would cost us to purchase. And we added $30,000 of additional funding for the 100th anniversary. On the revenue side for general fund, we've taken the proposed millage of the 3.1955, and that did enable us to handle the changes to personnel costs to have more competitive pay rates. It allowed us to increase the health insurance premiums as well as the liability and property insurance premiums. And as we mentioned, our brief you on the organizational efficiency program funding. The main reason I'd like to see the 3.1955 millage is when you look out not only for this coming year, but you look out like 3 to 4 years out from now, we start getting into a pattern of having our projections look higher expense-wise than we will be able to afford in revenues. That's just based on our assumptions, based on past history, projecting the revenue flows out as well as the historical spending pattern that we've had. So it's a good thing not only for this coming year, but down the road we'll be, I'm sure, happy to have that additional level of funding. I provided this chart in the past. It shows the amount of dollar change in people's tax bills and commercial entity tax bills. Just focusing on the center set of numbers for a property that was assessed at $250,000 last year. They would actually, with the 3.1955 millage, pay another $82 on their tax bill. If they were not covered by homestead, they would have up to a 10% increase in their assessments, and as a result, they would be paying $153 more on their tax bill. This is a chart just to show our history on setting the millage as compared to the rollback rate for 11 of the 18-year history that we've accumulated here. Over 61% of the time, we have either gone at rollback or less than rollback. So we're still, overall, as a track record, we're doing, I think, quite well to be able to say that we could accomplish that. If you look back in 2015, our millage rate, the 3.1955 millage rate is actually 17% lower than it was for that year. And once again, it's 10% above what we levied in 2023. Just going through the other major funds of the city, first the golf course, another good year in revenue, so we have actually projected out and hope that this will continue. It covers our payment for city services as well as covering the rent charged by the airport. And we have increased the amount and gone higher on the amount that they will pay back to general fund towards a loan. And we are keeping on track with the amortization of the loan from the building department. The really good news about this year is we were able to pay cash for the golf cart fleet and still have a balance remaining, or I'm projecting a balance remaining of cash at the end of this September 30th of this year. So we're going into the next year in much better condition because we won't have those payments or lease arrangement on the golf carts.
Hey, Ken. Does that make any assumption of the money for the sale of the golf carts coming back yet, or will that be additional once it happens?
Well, most of that, there was some, the amount we already could show that we collected in this year already from what we have sold.
Right.
That's shown in the current year.
Okay.
As we sell additional ones, that revenue will fall into next year,
But that will go back into this cash fund?
But it's
correct?
basically, yes,
Okay.
it's in addition to cash.
Awesome. Thank you.
The airport budget is doing quite well as far as its revenues covering operating costs and payments that it owes to the discretionary sales tax fund. We are still paying for hangars A and hangar B that were financed using DST funding. And we continue to pay for some of the major projects out of the DST funding that are for the airport. We do have a policy that if it's a project that will create additional revenue for the airport, we hope to recapture that and have them pay back the DST funds if it is funded out of those accounts. For the building fund, the permanent revenue, we have noticed a slowdown in collections, slowdown in activity. The bright side of the picture with the building fund is that they do have a substantial cash reserves, so it's not a need for immediate concern, but we don't want to get in the position we were about 7 or 8 years ago when we were actually jockeying the numbers so that general fund was subsidizing the building fund, which was paid back, by the way. I've talked about the American Rescue Plan Act. In the past, we are funding the initial projects outlined by the City Council. There is a provision in that act that allows you to allocate any interest earnings to basically any kind of items the city would like to fund. You don't have to follow the same guidelines as the principal amount that they paid us under that act. So we did take a couple of items and funded them out of the interest earnings, the artificial reef grant, and the recently, I know you've seen the water supply work plan. Always a reminder that those funds have to be obligated by December 31st of 2024, just over a year from now. And although they do take time, we still need to focus on making sure those are accomplished or the funds are allocated elsewhere. Local option gas tax collections are pretty steady, about 3% growth rate. And we are funding the road preservation and associated swale work according to the paving management program. We are totally out of debt as far as repaying any bank notes or bond issues on gas tax projects, which I think is a sound financial position to be in. So the gas tax fund will cover road preservation as opposed to those to reconstruction kind of work. Reconstruction work we will fund out of the discretionary sales tax as well as some of the American Rescue Plan Act monies. So as long as the discretionary sales tax funding remains and is available to us, we're in good shape as far as our ongoing expected cost of operations. But I remember the day when they had the federal revenue sharing program and a similar type of expenditure was allowed where you could spend for like major capital projects, but then all of a sudden we didn't have those capital project monies available to us. So that's just something to have an ear out for as far as any, this would be a legislation by the state that would restrict those funds in any way or reduce the amounts that are allocated. So we are very dependent on the DST monies.
Right. What would be a reason why we wouldn't get the consistency on the DST money?
Well, it is a state statute that allows counties to vote along with the other governmental entities in the county to share those DST funds.
Right.
But that state legislation, just like they authorize their sales tax, they allow us an additional 1 cent on purchases over $5,000 to be taxed and shared locally. So there's nothing to say that legislation could change down the road.
Right. Okay, I understand now. It's like, wow, we're getting the DST money and it's already sent out to us, but what would be a reason why we wouldn't get it any longer? And that would be a perfect example as to why the legislature change it, right?
We are talking almost $5 million of revenue every year.
Right, yeah. Our DST funds are over $5 million. That's correct.
Now, a lot of that has been, like I pointed out, has been funded for airport projects, but also major public works projects. It pays for all our police vehicle replacements. And a lot of what we've done with the MIS technology has been funded through the DST monies.
And the city of Sebastian gets the largest chunk of all municipalities. I think ours was like 11% of the total compared to the other cities was a lot lower than us. I was impressed by that number.
Well, we're the largest municipality
Well,
in the county,
there you go.
so that's
Yeah.
why.
I was just concerned
gets
about
away.
it being cut, and why would it be cut? You know, we depend on a lot of those funds, the DST funds, for a lot of things, so that's, my point was asking the question. What would cause us to lose that amount of funding?
Some unfunded mandate that they decide we have to take it from there, or who knows, they love to do that.
Yeah. What do you say, Mr. McPartland? I couldn't hear you, your mic wasn't.
No one spends any more money.
Oh, okay, there you go. Sorry about that, Ken, you can go ahead,
That's
proceed.
okay. Glad to address those questions. Riverfront CRA Fund, we are paying some operating kind of cost out of those funds that are related to the operation of the CRA. We did have to, because of the state legislation, where we were funding special events in the city out of CRA funding, they're no longer allowing for that. So we had to pick that up out of general funds. This is just an example of how we have to watch our friends up north.
Wow.
We were able to fund out of CRA monies, projected work on the working waterfront as well as the Central Avenue Catalyst site out in the future years. Recreational impact fees are being used for scheduled improvements to the playgrounds and parks. And we do allow like $5,000 to each of the 4 zones that, as the Parks and Recreation Committee identifies an immediate need that wasn't perhaps provided for in the annual budget, that they can go ahead and address some of those, for instance, a safety concern or some equipment replacement. Stormwater Utility Fund. Even though the revenues are exceeding the basic personnel and operating costs as they are as far as number of people that we have on staff, the capital is very limited on what can be afforded out of those monies. And we're looking to the American Rescue Act, our DST funds, for any kind of major expenditures to the extent we can handle those. But it does look imminent that we would need to consider a rate increase by next year so that we don't get too far in the red as far as our cost exceeding the amount of revenues that fee generates at the current level. A couple of funds that have no expenditures really budgeted next year, one being the Law Enforcement Forfeiture Fund. Those items have to come directly to the council each time we go to purchase those. That's a state statute that regulates on how those funds are utilized. And the Parking in lieu of Fund, we've accumulated a balance of $95,331, but there's no actual projects that we have on schedule to use those funds. The Cemetery Trust Fund, half the sales that are made from selling cemetery lots are allocated to operation and maintenance type of expenditures. The other half has to be applied towards either expanding the cemetery or adding or doing something that enables us to have more lots for sale, basically. So we can keep a balance in that trust fund for future care and operation of the cemetery. Just to summarize the capital improvement program, it's always good to look at the amount of funding that we have projected over the next 6 years and what percentage of those projects funded are actually paid through grant monies. If you look at just next year, there's about $12 million funded by grants out of the $15 million of the 5 total largest items that we have in the program. And if you look out over the 6 years, about 44.6% of major projects funded in the capital improvement program would be available from grant funding. That pretty much concludes my briefing on it. I'd be glad to address any questions or concerns. And then, of course, we've already had the resolutions read into the record, but we do need a separate vote for setting the tentative millage at the 3.1955, and to actually vote on adoption of the tentative budget for next year. You will have the final reading of these resolutions at the next meeting on September 27th. And I will have the financial policies and approval of a separate resolution on the capital improvement program on that agenda for the 27th.
All right, so I guess, since we read everything up front there on the resolutions, I suppose next, is there any summation from staff, anybody? Mr. Benton?
Mr. Mayor, if I may, if you all have any questions of it, we're here to answer them. But I also just want to make sure I recognize Mr. Kilgore for all of his, leadership through this budget process, and also all of our department heads and the entire finance department. They all play a big role, so every one of them are heavily involved with it, and all of our department heads for working hard. But we're here to answer any questions that you all have. Thank you.
All right, so I guess my concern is we're going to go ahead and open up the public hearing for Resolution R-23-22. Is there anyone from the public who would like have input on this? No one in the audience? Do we have anyone on Zoom from public?
Nobody's raised their hand.
Okay, seeing none, public input is closed. Council, anybody have any questions? We'll go ahead and start with Mr. Dodd. If he's on there, we get him out of the way. Mr. Dodd, do you have anything?
I don't, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay. I don't necessarily have any questions. I want to thank the city manager and the accounting staff on being able to put this budget together. The 3.1955 is, it's a disappointing hit from my perspective, only because it increases taxes 10%, but I also know that we need it. The biggest complaints that we hear from people are that we're not getting stormwater done, we're not getting streets fixed, we're not doing this stuff. And there is a very concerted and constructive effort that's been initiated by the new city manager to begin to do that. And quite frankly, to accomplish that, he needs the funds. So I'm absolutely in favor of this millage rate. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you. Anyone else from council? No? I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move approval of Resolution R-23-22, adopting a tentative millage rate of 3.1955. And do I need to set the second public hearing for September 27th?
All right.
Second that.
So we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, Madam Clerk?
Vice Mayor Nunn?
Yes.
Councilmember Dixon?
Yes.
Councilmember Dodd?
Yes.
Councilmember McPartlin?
Yes.
And Mayor Jones?
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to open the public hearing on Resolution R-23-23. I think, City Attorney, you don't need to do anything else since you read it into the record earlier, correct?
That's correct, sir.
All right, so we'll go ahead and skip that. Staff, anything from staff on this?
Nothing additional to add at this time.
All right, is there anyone from the public who would like to have input on this? None in the audience. How about Zoom?
Nobody's raised their hand.
All right, hearing none, public input's closed. Mr. Benton, do you or your staff have anything else further to say? If not, it's okay. All right, thank you. Council, what's your pleasure on this?
I'd like to, if I could, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you to staff. I kind of echo what Mr. Dodd said on the last resolution. It's not something we want to do by any means, raising taxes some, but if you look at the tax rate over the past, say, 10, 12 years, it's been lower than forever anything over the past couple of years, and I think we've hurt a little bit because of it. We've got things that haven't been getting done. So with that being said, I thank you, Mr. Benton, for not only looking at what needs to be done, but also looking at opportunities for improving the overall structure of the city and how it runs, and thank you for that. And I'll make a motion to approve our Resolution R-23-23 and set a final hearing date for September 27th, 2023 at 6 p.m.
Second.
Second, do we have a motion and a second? Anybody else like to come? I'd like to thank you guys too. This is awesome. We've been kicking the can down the road for many years and it's finally catching up to us. If we don't do something now, this is what's gonna happen. It's just gonna compound over the next few years, and it's just gonna cost our citizens a lot more. So it's very important that we move forward with this, keep our city on track, and I'm really looking forward to the future here, thanks to the great staff that we have, so.
Yes, and I would like to add to that. One thing I was asking since I was seated on council was for us to enhance the city's communication to our residents. And Mr. Benton added, hoping to add a new position with this via social media and other ways to market to our residents. And so I really hope that we'll see that action take place. And I just, you know, with his direction and Karen Miller's approach to our initiatives with our streets and our swales, I really hope that with this millage rate, we will actually see action happen, and the taxpayers will see that this just isn't an unnecessary increase, that action will take place. So, thank you, everyone.
Mr. McPartland?
I'd just like to thank Ken once again for a very tight budget, working with everybody. And Mr. Benton, we're giving you this. We have great expectations, but I have no doubt that you'll be able to provide the results.
Yeah, well said, Mr. McPartland. Thank you, guys. So, and there's no further deliberation. Madam Clerk, call the roll.
Councilmember Dixon?
Yes.
Councilmember Dodd?
Yes.
Councilmember McPartland?
Yes.
Mayor Jones?
Yes.
And Vice Mayor Nunn?
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much on that. Now, let's see what's next on our agenda. So the final public hearing on the millage and budget will be held again on September 27th, 2023 at 6 p.m. And this meeting's adjourned. Where's my hammer?